Right, well, good morning. You guys look great, nice and full in here. So we're in week 7 of our summer teaching series on Elijah and Elisha, two of the greatest prophets in all the Bible that you could read about. Hopefully, maybe we've sparked some interest over the last few weeks for you to go back to the parts of, it started in 1 Kings chapter 17 through, I think we're going up through 2 Kings chapter 6 or something like that. But just reading, sort of getting it all, because, there's just no way for us to fully talking about these guys in detail in just 8 weeks. But we've seen some incredible things happen. It started out with Elijah, and we spent 4 weeks and watched God do some incredible things through him. He was fed miraculously by ravens. He drank from a brook in the middle of a 3.5-year drought. He's raised the dead, called fire down from heaven. Just absolutely blow your mind kind of stuff. And then his successor, Elisha, he comes on the scene asking for a double portion. I want to be twice as good as him. And he's done things that, it's like, whoa, we didn't even really expect. And we've sort of made little phrases with Elisha, sort of to remember his story. Remember that first week we talked about a crazy commitment. And Elisha was the guy who burned some cows. Well, no, he didn't. Burnt plows, killed the cows, roasted the cows. It was actually oxen, but it sounds better if you rhyme it and say cows. It's sort of catchy like that. Last week, Trey sort of titled his message, Fanatical Faith. And Elisha was led by God to, basically go out in the middle of a heat wave and dig a bunch of ditches. And God says, I'm going to fill them full of water. It's just sort of blow your mind kind of stuff. And so today we're going to watch him take something, again, somewhat sort of ordinary and do something extraordinary with it. We're going to watch Elisha as he instructs a widow lady, just go get a bunch of jars. Just get a bunch of empty jars and bring them. And today we're going to talk about phenomenal provision. So that's going to be sort of our catchword today is phenomenal. And I hope it's going to be of some help to you, some encouragement, because I know that, there might be somebody here that right now you just feel a bit overwhelmed. Life's just too much. There's just too much going on. Too many demands. You look at your list of to-dos and the time you have to do it, and it's like, that's not going to happen. There's just too many things that need my attention, and I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, and just to be quite frank with you, I don't even have the desire to give my attention to all of these things. And we could sort of just run down the list of what it might be, and it could be sort of a spiritual thing, Maybe you came in this morning and you're just sort of running a little low on faith. Like you haven't given up on God or anything. You're not abandoning God. Just my faith tank just a little low. It's on fumes right now. And I'm looking for God to fill me. Or more practical things. You're going through some financial struggles and you just feel like, I'm in a hole. Can't seem to dig myself out. Or my marriage has got issues. Me and my husband or wife, we've split up and I'm sort of on my own. I'm trying to raise a child. I'm trying to work and provide. And, I'm fighting feelings of loneliness because, I'm used to having somebody. And this is just, my whole world is turned upside down right now. Or, just talk to some of these college students that are heading off to college here in just the next few weeks. They're stressing, thinking about which courses to take and, how they're going to adapt to this new life and everything that's going on there. They're stressed and they're feeling a bit overwhelmed, and I'm sure that maybe there's some younger ones here that, here lately for some reason mom and dad's been talking about the D word, divorce, and that's just rocked your world, and you're thinking, what am I going to do? You're getting pulled in both directions, and it's just all a bit too much. Whatever the situation might be, whether I hit on it there or not, we know what it's like to feel overwhelmed, and I think that today's message and the text that we're going to look at today is going to be some hope and encouragement. So if you would, let's find our way to 2 Kings chapter 4. 2 Kings chapter 4. A story of phenomenal provision. 2 Kings chapter 4, it starts out like this. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that he revered the Lord, But now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves. And Elisha replied to her, how can I help you? Tell me what you have in your house. Your servant has nothing there at all, she said, except a little oil. So as we start this story out, a story of phenomenal provision, we're introduced to a lady, a widow, single mom, who's poor. She's dead broke. Some have suggested that this quite possibly could have been the widowed wife of the prophet Obadiah. And if you back up into 1 Kings, during Elijah's story, you find out that Obadiah was another prophet who took it upon himself to protect and provide for 100 prophets of God so that they would be safe from evil King Ahab and his wife Jezebel. And so it's understandable, it's very reasonable to think, well, if he took it upon himself to provide and protect for over 100 prophets, well, he very well could have gone through their life savings just to make sure that these had their needs met. And then when something happened to him, his wife, his widow, she's left without. She's struggling. The bills have piled up, and she's thinking, I've got no way out of this. The only way for me to pay off all of these bills and to get ahead, well, would be in her time to take up employment which no self-respecting lady would want to do. And so just use your imagination there. If you're still not following me, ask me after service. I'll sort of fill you in. She didn't really have any options. She didn't really have any chances. She's desperate. She's lost everything. She's lost her husband. She's lost basically all of her money. The creditors are pounding on the door. She's in danger of losing her sons. I mean, she's got big problems. Not like the little minuscule problems that most of us fight. Like, maybe this week your GPS took you to the wrong place. You think that's a problem. You have a big meltdown over it, but it's not a big issue. Or maybe you got the latest update. Now it just doesn't work at all, right? Last week, you went out to eat after lunch, and maybe you went to the Chinese restaurant and they overcooked your egg roll. Oh, it's just so terrible being you, right? I mean, all of these problems. Why you? Why now? Why this? You posted your latest picture in your newest dress, and you only got 6 likes. Hashtag, how could they not love it? See, our life's full of little problems. Like some of us have what we might call graduate problems. We got some marriage issues going on. We got some financial issues going on. We got a teen that's sort of going out on a rail, and parents don't know what to do with them, how to sort of steer them back in the right direction. And, that sort of life. And that's the kind of things I'm sure there's a few of us in here that our problems reach like doctorate level, like major issues, some big problems. And you're looking for some major provision in life. And here lately you've been thinking, if God doesn't come through on this, I don't know if we're going to make it. Like this might be sort of the end of the road. Something bad's going to happen if God doesn't come through in a big way. You're looking for phenomenal provision. I think today's message in this text here is going to absolutely be used to build your faith and sort of lift your spirits. And so, like I said, we've got this woman who's in dire need. And she goes to the prophet, to the man of God, to relate her story and to tell him her situation. And she's like, I'm a widow. I'm in debt. I'm in danger of losing my 2 sons. And his response is what? Well, the good thing is it wasn't like blowing her off. He didn't say, man, it stinks to be you. Maybe things will work out and get better for you. And he didn't do what some of us typically do when other people bring their issues and their problems to us. And they're telling, this is what's going on in my life, and this is bad, and this went wrong, and blah, blah, blah. And then we look at them like, oh, my heart breaks for you. I'll pray for you. And then we never do. I don't understand why we do that, right? Why not actually help? Why not actually do something instead of, I'll pray and then sort of forget about it later? Here's what Elisha does. Verse 2, his first words, how can I help? How can I help? Now, this might be going a little off subject a little bit, but that's the question that people ask who change the world. Like those people who have the greatest potential to have the greatest impact are those who see a need and the first thing out of their mouth or the first thought to their mind is, what can I do about that? How can I help? What can I do to contribute or to make things better? Is that the kind of person you are? Is that the question that you typically ask? Maybe a coworker comes into your office and they're talking about all the stresses in their life and the complicated issues that they're facing. Do you ask them, how can I help? Or maybe a mom or a dad that you know is talking about things going on in their child's life and the battles that they're fighting there. How can I help? You see, that question is the question that people ask who want to be used by God greatly. Who wake up in the morning and say, God, whatever need I cross and discover today, if I can't meet it directly, would you at least use me as a vessel? Like work through me to do something about it? How can I help? Now, the next question Elisha asks is there in the last part of verse 2. He says, tell me, what do you have in your house? Now, this is where the story begins to take shape. For those of us in here who feel a bit overwhelmed, who are in a place of lack or need, life, we would describe it as overwhelmed, underwhelmed. It's just too much right now. We're looking for God to come through in a phenomenal way. This is the part of the story where our faith gets challenged. It begins to grow. But notice here that the prophet doesn't come on the scene because everybody thinks that the preacher has all the answers. But the prophet didn't come on the scene and say, hey, let me fix this for you. I got all the answers to your questions and I will meet all your needs. Now, he doesn't even claim to have the ability to do that. But he does give her some very simple and small steps to take in order to see God move in her life in some big ways. So if you're taking notes this morning, if you're looking for God to come through in a phenomenal way, to bring your way some phenomenal provisions, then number one, here's what you need to do. Stop focusing on what you need and start working with what you have. Elisha instructs this lady, stop focusing on what you need and start working with what you have. He totally respects her dignity. He understands her position and her situation of dire need, but he says to her, let's start with what you have. What's already in your possession, in your house. Let's start with what you can do. And let's just see if with what you can do and what you have, if God can't use that to meet what you need. And her response is, I don't have anything. Did you see that in verse 2? Your servant has nothing there at all. What's in your house? Nothing. Nothing at all, she said, except a little oil. And that's understandable. We've all been there. When we're hurting, when we're in a place of lack and of need, typically all we can see is the need. It's hard to focus on the blessings. It's hard to focus on what you have when there's so much that you feel and perceive you don't have, right? So we can relate to this lady. I don't have enough money. How am I ever going to get what I need? I don't have a spouse, or I haven't met the one. How am I going to live happily ever after? Like last night, we just had an event for our life group leaders, and we gave them all this cool t-shirt, just as a way to tell them we appreciate them. But as we're looking for new life group leaders and life group hosts, most of these happen in people's homes. We get people saying to us, how can I be a life group leader, or how can I host a life group because I don't have a house big enough, or my house isn't nice enough. See, we're always focusing on what we don't have, what we think we need, rather than what we do have. I mean, I've heard of women, I don't really know one personally, but I've heard of them, they're out there somewhere, who walk into a closet, like full of clothes, walk out frustrated and say, I don't have anything to wear. Those of you who laugh must know her. But I've heard of them, right? We focus on what we don't have instead of working with what we've got. And we got to stop doing that. If we want to see God move in our life, and we want to see Him work in some phenomenal ways and providing for us in some big ways, Elisha says, just start working with what you've got. Start working with what you got. So he asks, what do you have in your house? Well, nothing. I mean, like, you don't understand the situation I just told you. I've got nothing. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute. Except one thing, I've got a little bit of oil. I got a little bit of oil. Now, it was likely olive oil, which is a good thing because olive oil in this culture and time, it would have been a hot commodity. I mean, we can go down to Walmart and buy it all day long, but this is a big deal because what she has is valuable and extremely useful. I mean, they had all kinds of uses for it. They cooked with it. They burnt lamps with it. They used it as like a skin moisturizer. It had medicinal elements to it. They would use it in the worship of God and anoint people in religious services. I mean, what she had was extremely valuable. But the problem in her eyes was, I don't have a lot. I don't have much of it. See, that's where this story gets really good, man. Because aren't you glad we serve a God who is fully capable of doing a lot with very little? That's what He's shown Himself able to do over and over and over. And maybe that's the reason that some of you are sitting here. Like, you don't even need the rest of the message because all you needed to hear is that what you have, though it may be very little, God is fully capable of doing more than you could ever imagine with it. He can do that. And He's done it all throughout the Bible. You go all the way back and you maybe look at the story of Moses when he was called to lead the people of Israel out from Egypt. When they left Egypt, all they had was the clothes on their back and as much supplies as they could carry. But God provided for them for 40 years in the desert and wilderness. I mean, think about that. Some of those who left Egypt were children. And after 40 years, they've grown into fully mature adults. But yet their clothes didn't wear out and their sandals never wore out. Listen, my kids grow out of sandals every 2 weeks. There's not a chance they're going to wear the same shoes 40 years from now. But God provides in phenomenal ways when we work with what we have. You think about David when he was a teenager. The Philistine army and their champion warrior Goliath came out against the Israelites and taunting them. And everybody's afraid because Elijah's the guy, he's too big to beat. David goes, he takes his sling and he goes, picks out 5 little rocks out of a brook. He begins to pray, God, all I have is this. And I know it's not much, but I got a sling and I got a few rocks here. Can you use me to defeat the guy who everybody else says is a sure win? He went out and slayed a giant. Jesus was teaching one time, and thousands of people had crowded around him, and after an all-day sort of preaching seminar, everybody's hungry. But they're miles away from town. There's nowhere to buy any food. And this one little boy walks up. He says, all I've got is a little. I got a few fish. I've got some bread. Jesus takes a little and does a lot, and He feeds over 5,000 people. He said in Luke chapter 17 to us, He said, listen, those of you who are low on faith, that's okay. I can do something with that. Because with a little faith, faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and it will be done. God specializes in doing a lot with very, very little. And so Elisha asked this lady, what is it that you have in your house? What do you have available to you? Nothing at all, she said, except a little oil. Man, I can see a huge smile come across the face of the prophet of God. And he's like, well, that's all God needs. That's all God needs. It's just a little. Notice that Elisha and God through Elisha didn't ask this woman, what do you need? What do you want? What don't you have? His question is, what do you have? But what I have is very little. That's enough. God can use it. God can use it. Stop focusing on what you need. Start working with what you have. Because see, faith says we can even if we don't. We can even if we don't. I've learned in my life through experience. Sometimes limitation births innovation. Like you don't go through life. Most people don't go through life always having more than what they need. There are times when we have just enough, just barely enough, when we're just having to stretch to make ends meet. But it's in those times that I've learned limitation births innovation. Like when you don't have much, you got to get creative with what you've got. And I'm coming to understand that sometimes that can be of God. Like He will allow us to go through times where we have to stretch things, where we have to go without a few things, where we have to work with a little, because He wants our creativity to be sparked. And He wants to teach us that in the end, all we really need is Him. Like what it is we think we need or we think we want may not be what we actually need. We just really need Him. We need to depend on Him, or we need to use our creativity. Stop focusing on what you need. Start working with what you have. And the second thing I think we learn from this story about God's phenomenal provision is this. Give God what you have. Like even that little, give God what you have. Trust Him to give you what you need. Trust Him to give you what you need. Let's pick back up in the story, verse 3. Elisha said to this lady, "Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side." She left him and afterward shut the door behind her and her sons. And they brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another one." But he replied, "There's not a jar left." Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go and sell the oil, pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what's left." It's phenomenal provision. But I love the way it started out. You know, Elisha says, go ask all of your neighbors for a bunch of jars. And don't ask for just a few. Like get as many as you can. As many as you and your sons can carry. Just get all the jars in the neighborhood. Because here's the lesson in that. If you're going to expect God to do a lot with a little, then you better make plans for somewhere to put it. Because God don't back down from a challenge. If you're going to expect God to do a lot with a very little, make plans for somewhere to put it. Go ask for a bunch of jars. And then he says, go home, shut the door, and take what little oil you have. Take what you've got. Trust God with it. Pour it out. And as you begin to pour, as you begin to empty your jars of what you have, you're going to notice that God begins to refill it and give you what you need. You pour it out, and as that jar gets full, you set it to the side and you pour another. And then another. And then another. And notice the oil never ran out until they ran out of jars. God never stopped blessing until they stopped having a place to put it. And see, that's something that we probably need to be challenged with this morning. See, some of you here this morning need to start pouring. You need to start taking what you have and start pouring it out. Start trusting God with it. Some of you, you've taken that step. You just need to keep doing it. Keep pouring. Keep pouring. And when that jar's full, set it to the side and pour some more. See, I don't know what every situation is, and I don't know what provision it is that you've been laying awake at night praying, asking, God, would you provide? Would you do this? Would you meet this need? I don't know. But I believe what he's saying through this text this morning is stop focusing on what you need. Start working with what you have. When you've discovered what that is, pour it out, and I'll refill what you need. I'm going to be there. You can trust me. God will always provide. You know, I talk with a lot of people who struggle financially. That seems to be probably the biggest issue. But I think this really applies. I talk with people who say, I know it's the right thing to do, the tithe, I believe in that, but I just don't know how we can do it. Or I want to give, to the expansion campaign, but I just don't know how we're going to do it. I want to, like my heart's there, but the numbers, they just don't add up. And I believe what God is saying today is pour it out. Give, and I'll give you what you need. Trust me. You got to stop waiting for what you think you need or whatever it is you want. Well, I'm going to give when I get a new job, or I'm going to give when I finally get a raise, or I'm going to start doing this when I feel more financially secure. And God's saying, if you're waiting for that time, you're never going to get there. Stop focusing on what you need. Start working with what you have. Give it to God and trust Him to refill that jar with what you really need. I've seen this happen in my life over and over and over. For about 5 years now, Jessica and I, like many of you, have been on one household income. Before our first child, before Elin was born, we were both working, and she was making quite a bit more money than I made. When she went back after we had Elin, she worked about a month, and they laid her off. And so for the last 5 years, we've been on one income. Our household income was cut by 55%. More than half. And when that happened, I'm thinking, how are we going to make it? I mean, what are we going to do? We've been used to living like this with this much, and now we got to live like this with this much. This can't work. And so over the past 5 years, I mean, it's been tight at times, but we haven't missed a beat. God's always provided for what we need and when we need it. But leading up, I'll just be honest with you, leading up to the kickoff of the capital campaign, I knew I was going to be standing here on this stage and challenging and asking you guys to give and to give generously and, to really step out there on faith. But the whole time I'm thinking, how are we going to do it? I'm the pastor, and if I'm expecting or asking people to do it, then I got to lead the way. So, God, I want to give. I'm going to give, but I just don't know how. And I felt like God laid upon my heart a certain number for me to contribute up front as an offering, and then in addition to that, another number that we're going to give on a monthly basis for the next 3 years. And I looked at those and I'm thinking, God, this just can't be. I mean, we don't have this. I don't know how this is going to happen. And God began to teach me these lessons. Stop focusing on what you need or what you don't have, and start focusing and working with what you do have. If you'll just give me what you've got, then I'll provide for what you need. And so, just a couple months ago, we gave our upfront offering. We filled out a pledge card, committed ourselves to say, all right, we're going to give this amount of money additional, above and beyond our normal tithe every month from now till, year 2018. This is what we're going to do. And I turned it in, believing that somehow God's going to make it happen. And I'm not saying this is exactly the way it's going to happen in your situation. I'm just saying you need to trust God. But within 2 weeks of us giving that offering and filling out our pledge card and starting to commit and fulfill our obligation, within 2 weeks, I got a phone call. Somebody wanted me to do some side work, which I don't do a lot of. They said, I need this done. I said, all right, I got the time to do it. That job paid me what I gave in the initial offering. And then Jessica, who's been taking up some work cleaning houses and stuff, she got some extra work that pays her 4 times what we put on the pledge card that we give a month. I mean, tell me God ain't good. God is faithful. You can't outgive Him. If you will pour out what you have, He will refill it with what you need. Every single time. God is faithful. And so Elisha says, whatever you've got, however little it is, go home, shut the door, pour it out, and watch God give you what you need. Now go get those jars. Now, I think in her mind, she was probably, well, what kind of jars? You know, ladies are pretty detailed people. Like they take a general command, like go get some jars, and we got to have a whole discussion. What size jar? What color? What shape? You know, what's the purpose of the jar? What material, right? What are we going to do with it? None of that made any difference. There was only one requirement. I want you to pick up on this. There's only one requirement that Elisha mentioned for the jars. The only requirement was this: they must be empty. Why does that make a difference? Well, in order to relate it to our lives, listen to what Paul says. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. He says, we have this treasure, which in the context is the hope, the knowledge of the gospel, or salvation through Jesus. We have this treasure in jars of clay. Jars of clay. I mean, what's that talking about? What's that referring to? If you read that chapter, you'll find out that these jars of clay that Paul's talking about is us. Our bodies, by extension, our lives. We're the dirt houses. And you take what Paul is saying and what we see happening in Elisha's story with this widow lady, and you put those things together, and we learn a beautiful thing that, you know, if we want God to provide for us in some phenomenal ways, we want Him to come through in our life and for us in some big ways, all He needs is an empty jar. He needs us to empty ourselves. He's saying to us this morning, if you want to experience phenomenal provision, if you want to see me working in your life and filling you, then I need you to be empty. Empty yourself of pride. Empty yourself of self-provision. Empty yourself of your greed. Empty yourself of your own agenda. Empty yourself of your own desires. And when we are completely empty, He begins to fill us. The interesting thing is what these jars in the story of Elisha was being filled with oil. Like I said, it was extremely valuable and practical in their time, but all through the Scripture, you know what oil represents? It's symbolic of God and His Holy Spirit. God is teaching us, if you'll empty yourself, I will fill you with what you really need. Me. I'll fill you with what you really need. And that's me. So do you want to see God do for you what He did for her? You want to experience God's phenomenal provision? Stop focusing on what you need and what you don't have. Start working with what you got. Whatever that is, pour it out. Give it all over to Him. Trust Him to fill you with what you really need, which is more and more of Him.